Thank you for joining Detective Duo, your companion for stories of wit, charm, and quiet suspense, the kind Tommy and Tuppence might have uncovered in their early adventures. Subscribe for more of these mysteries, and let us know where you're listening from. Tuppence Beresford had always prided herself on the sturdiness of her childhood treasures. A chipped doll's head here, a battered tin there. If anything had survived her spirited youth, she considered it a personal triumph, but none had survived quite as triumphantly as the delicate porcelain teacup she now held between her fingers, admiring the painted violets curling around its rim. She lifted it with fond nostalgia, her eyes bright. "It's absurd," she said, half laughing at herself. "I must have been 8 when Mother gave it to me, and she told me I'd break it within a week." Tommy, reading the morning paper in his shirt sleeves, hummed thoughtfully. "Well, you've certainly outlasted her prediction. 40 years and counting. A remarkable record of restraint by your standards." "Don't be impertinent," she said, tossing him a playful scowl over her shoulder. She barely finished the remark before the cup, without warning, without pressure, without the slightest provocation, split cleanly in two. There was no clatter, no suggested clumsiness, simply a faint, decisive crack, like a bone snapping in miniature. One half slid from her fingers and fell to the tablecloth. The other rested in her palm as though stunned by its own betrayal. Tuppence stared at it. "Tommy, I didn't—" "I know you didn't," he said, rising immediately. He took the broken piece gently from her hand, examining the edges. They glimmered faintly, not like ordinary ceramic, but dusted with something crystalline. He rubbed the edge with his thumb. A few grains glittered on his skin. "What is that?" she asked. "Looks like— well, I don't know." He leaned in further, brow furrowed. "It isn't ordinary glaze." Before she could respond, footsteps pounded across the hall and Albert burst in, breathless, hair sticking up as though he had sprinted through a gale. "Mr. Beresford, Mrs. Beresford, a message for you. Just arrived." He held out an envelope, its cream paper thick and expensive, the address artfully penned, Mrs. Prudence Beresford. Tuppence blinked. "Delivered? By whom?" "A man," Albert said. "Didn't give a name, just thrust it into my hand and said it was urgent. Then off he went before I could ask anything." Tommy and Tuppence exchanged a glance, one of those infinitesimal looks that spouses share when something shifts in the air. "Well," Tuppence said, her tone attempting brightness, "let's see what our mysterious admirer wants." She tore open the flap. A single sheet lay inside, folded crisply. She opened it, and her breath caught. "It's blank," she whispered. Indeed, the page was spotless from corner to corner. No words, no marks, nothing. But something else drifted upward, a faint, unmistakable scent. Expensive lavender. Not the type kept in household sachets or perfume drawers. This was sophisticated, continental, confident. The scent of a woman who never hurried unless she meant to. Tommy inhaled once. Odd choice for a prank. Tuppence set the paper down more quickly than necessary. "Oh, do stop looking like that, Tommy. It's probably a mistake. Someone's idea of mischief, or a child's trick. Children don't buy lavender perfume that costs 5 guineas an ounce." "Yes, well," she said sharply, then softened at once. "Let's not make it larger than it is." But Tommy had noticed something she clearly didn't intend him to see, the faint tremor in her right hand. Tuppence Beresford, who had once picked a lock while balancing on a window ledge with enviable calm, was not a woman who trembled easily. Albert hovered uncertainly. "Shall I fetch tea, or perhaps, something stronger?" "No, Albert," Tommy said gently. "Thank you. We'll manage." Albert nodded and retreated. Silence filled the sunny sitting room, reaching into all its tidy corners, the mantel clock ticking steadily, the morning light warming the patterned carpet, the lingering fragrance from the shattered cup. It should have been an ordinary morning, but something unseen had seeped into the room like a shadow slipping through a keyhole. Tuppence picked up the broken cup again, examining the sparkling grains on its interior edge. "I must have damaged it ages ago," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Perhaps it was always waiting to give out. "No," Tommy murmured. "Something did this, not you." "Really, Tommy," she sighed, "you're behaving as if an international conspiracy has personally declared war on my crockery." He smiled tightly. Stranger things have happened. She placed the porcelain pieces into a small bowl, dusting her fingertips together as though ridding herself of something distasteful. Tommy folded the blank sheet, slipped it back into its envelope, and tucked it into the desk drawer. His thoughts whirred, not in panic, but in the orderly fashion of a man trained to notice when the fabric of the ordinary has been disturbed. "Tuppence," he said. "Does the lavender mean anything to you?" She paused, a heartbeat too long. "No," she said, "not especially." He nodded, though he didn't believe her. Not fully. Something beneath her words rippled, subtle but unmistakable. Tuppence had many talents: distraction, charm, improvisation, but lying plainly was not one of them. When she avoided an answer, it was usually deliberate. He changed tactics lightly. "The stranger. Did you see him, Albert?" Albert poked his head back in. "Only for a moment, sir. Tall fellow. Sharp sort of look. Didn't linger." Tommy dismissed him again and turned toward Tuppence. "There's no signature, no mark, no hint of who sent it, and the envelope wasn't posted. It was delivered. That suggests intent." "Tommy, darling," she said, leaning back into her chair with affected ease, "intent is your favourite hobby. You find it in mismatched socks and unwatered flowers. This is nothing." But her eyes, usually lively with mischief, held something shuttered, as though she had heard a tune no one else could hear. "Well," he said slowly, "perhaps we'll keep an eye out all the same." "For what? Ghosts of my childhood teacups?" He chuckled, though his unease remained. "Something like that." He stepped into the hallway to fetch a notebook, old habits returning, instincts sharpening. Behind him he heard the faint rustle of Tuppence rising from her chair. He wasn't meaning to eavesdrop. Truly he wasn't. But as he paused just beyond the doorway, her voice, soft, nearly inaudible, floated through the quiet. "It's starting again, isn't it?" The words were not addressed to him. They were barely addressed to the room, a confession to no one and nothing. Tommy stood motionless. Again. The word echoed in his mind like a pebble dropped into still water. He composed himself, re-entered the room with an expression deliberately calm. Tuppence was seated once more, her face arranged in its usual brightness, though her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. "Find what you were looking for?" she asked lightly. "Yes," he lied gently. "Just a pencil." They shared a smile, warm, familiar, but now strangely fragile. Tommy sat down, opened his notebook, and made a brief notation. Stranger, envelope, lavender, broken cup. 4 details, seemingly unrelated, yet enough to send a faint, undeniable shiver of foreboding down his spine. He glanced at Tuppence. She was gazing out the window, lost in thought, the sunlight catching the curve of her cheek. For the first time in years, Tommy Beresford had the uneasy sense that his clever, fearless wife was hiding something from him. Something that frightened her. Something that had now opened its eyes again. The next morning began with the kind of gentle domestic rhythm that usually suited Tommy Beresford. He buttered toast while Tuppence sorted through the Morning Post, humming a tune that did not quite reach its usual cheerfulness. The remnants of yesterday's strange events lingered in the corners of the room, not visible, but present, like an unwelcome draught that refused to be traced. Tommy watched her from behind the safety of his newspaper. She handled each envelope a little too carefully, her fingers pausing at every unknown sender. It was unlike her to be so delicate with the mundane. He opened his mouth to speak, but the bell rang, sharp, decisive, and delivered with far more confidence than the usual callers. Before either of them could move, Albert darted from the hallway, calling, "I'll get it, sir," as if the fate of England depended upon his punctuality. Moments later, Albert returned with a curious expression. "A lady for you, ma'am. Says her name is Mrs. Iris Merriweather." Tuppence froze. It was the briefest halt, half a breath, but Tommy noticed it. She recovered instantly, offering a bright, brittle smile. "Mrs. Merriweather. How extraordinary. Well, do show her in, Albert." The woman who entered possessed the polished air of someone accustomed to visiting drawing rooms uninvited, yet leaving them with the impression that her presence had been expected all along. She wore a tailored navy suit, a hat dipped at an angle that suggested expensive millinery, and gloves that looked freshly purchased. She held out a hand to Tuppence. "My dear Prudence," she said warmly, "you cannot imagine how delightful it is to see you again after all these years." Tuppence accepted the handshake with an expression that disguised everything except an instant's uncertainty. "Mrs. Merriweather," she returned, "it has been quite some time." Tommy frowned. Tuppence's mother had been a woman so resolutely private that she would have considered a bridge partner an intrusion. Friends had been neither sought nor welcomed. For this stranger to claim familiarity with her suggested either bold invention or something far more troubling. Mrs. Merriweather turned to him with a gracious nod. "And you must be Mr. Beresford. What a pleasure. I've heard so much about you." "Have you indeed?" Tommy asked, studying her closely. "All good, I hope?" "But of course," she said with a smile that never fully reached her eyes. "Your wife's mother spoke of her often. Such fondness, such pride. Though I must admit I was surprised when I heard you had moved here, after everything." Tuppence's head lifted sharply. "After everything?" "Yes, my dear. After your childhood keepsakes went missing and the unpleasant business with the burglaries in your old neighborhood. Shocking times." Tuppence forced a laugh. "Good heavens, I barely recall a thing about that." Tommy knew this wasn't true. Tuppence remembered everything. Birthdays, forgotten conversations, the price of butter during the war. For her to dismiss an entire episode of her youth outright was unlike her. Mrs. Merriweather, however, seemed satisfied and moved on with admirable smoothness. "And how is your old friend?" she asked. "What was her name?" "Lila Dane." The name dropped into the room like a pebble into deep water, sending ripples across Tuppence's composure. She set down her teacup carefully. "Lila who?" "Lila Dane," Mrs. Merriweather repeated with patient insistence. "Surely you remember her. You and she were quite the pair, always whispering and scheming like sisters." Tommy pretended to adjust his cuffs to hide his stare. Tuppence had never mentioned a Lila Dane in all their years of marriage. Not once. And yet, here was this stranger, speaking the name with the casual intimacy of someone recounting a shared past. "I'm afraid I don't recall her," Tuppence said lightly. "Tommy, did we receive that catalogue from the antiquarian bookseller yesterday?" There it was, diversion, swift and practiced. It only deepened Tommy's suspicion. Mrs. Merriweather leaned back, removing her gloves with elegant deliberation. The scent rose before she spoke again. Lavender, unmistakable and exact. The same fragrance that had risen from the blank letter the day before. Tommy inhaled subtly. "That's a striking perfume you're wearing, Mrs. Merriweather." She smiled with poised satisfaction. "I've worn it for years. I was told once it suited me. A silly thing, really. People attach such meaning to fragrance, don't they? A ghost of memory in a bottle." Tuppence shot Tommy a quick, sharp look, one that begged him not to pursue the topic. He tucked the observation away, filing it next to the crystalline dust on the teacup and the stranger who had delivered the first envelope. Mrs. Merriweather continued chatting, her words drifting like lace curtains, light, airy, but occasionally revealing something unsettling underneath. She spoke casually about Tuppence's childhood, referencing details Tommy had never heard: a lost brooch, a locked drawer in her mother's study, a summer spent in France. Tuppence's reactions were small but telling. Her shoulders stiffened, her smile tightened, her responses thinned. Tommy watched both women with increasing discomfort. Every time Tuppence seemed on the verge of responding honestly, she hesitated. Once she drew breath as if to interrupt, then closed her mouth again. After nearly an hour of polite verbal fencing, Mrs. Merriweather finally rose. "I won't intrude any longer. Such a pleasure to see you again, my dear. Truly. And Mr. Beresford, do take care. These are curious times." Tommy offered to walk her to the door, but she lifted a hand. "No need. I know my way perfectly." The remark landed oddly, as though she had been there before. When the front door closed behind her, Tuppence sagged into her chair, releasing a breath she had been holding since the woman arrived. Tommy waited. Silence gathered in the room, thickened, stretched. "Well," she said suddenly, springing to her feet with artificial briskness, "I think we should go out for lunch. Something hearty, something restorative. What do you say?" "Tuppence," Tommy replied gently. "Who was that woman?" "Nobody of consequence," she insisted, avoiding his eyes. "Just someone Mother knew, and Mother knew so many people." "That's not true," Tommy said quietly. Tuppence hesitated. Her fingers drummed the table, a tiny, betraying rhythm. Then she forced a laugh. Too bright, too hurried. You're becoming dramatic, Tommy. Next you'll accuse me of harbouring secret identities. He stepped closer. Did she threaten you? Of course not. Then why are you frightened? Her eyes met his with sudden raw honesty, and then the moment vanished, swept away behind a mask of cheer. Oh, do stop, Tommy. You're making a mountain out of a molehill. Let's go out, somewhere familiar. We'll forget this whole silly morning. He nodded, but unease gnawed at him. Tuppence linked her arm through his as they left the sitting room, chattering lightly about menus and weather and Albert's haircut. Anything but the visitor who smelled of lavender and spoke of ghosts. But as they stepped into the hallway, Tommy glanced back at the empty teacup bowl on the table. Something had begun yesterday, and the arrival of Mrs. Merriweather had not interrupted it. It had escalated it. And for the first time in their marriage, Tommy felt the threads of trust tugging, subtle, delicate, but unmistakably beginning to fray. It was not in Tommy Beresford's nature to pry into his wife's affairs. Curiosity, yes. Vigilance, certainly. But outright investigation, that had never before been necessary in the long, warm history of their marriage. Yet by the following morning, after Mrs. Merriweather's unsettling visit, Tommy felt an unfamiliar obligation tightening around him, an instinct sharpened not by suspicion, but by fear. Something was troubling Tuppence, something older than their life together, and if she refused to tell him, he would find another way to protect her. That decision led him to a door he had not opened in years, the back entrance of the War Office, where old intelligence officers went to occupy dusty posts and ignore the world's insistence on modernity. Major Harold Wanstead inhabited one such post, and as Tommy climbed the narrow stairwell to his cluttered office, he felt a strange sense of stepping back into a forgotten version of himself. Wanstead looked much the same as he had during the war, broad-shouldered, moustached, and eternally rumpled, as though life itself had never quite managed to press him flat. He peered up from a stack of folders when Tommy entered. Well, Beresford, thought you'd retired to a life of gardening and cheerful domesticity. I attempted it, Tommy said. Unfortunately, flowers don't take orders. Sit. Tell me what brings you skulking back into our musty corridors. Tommy lowered himself into the chair opposite. I'm looking into a name, a woman, Lila Dane. I've reason to believe she was involved in some minor fraud, nothing dramatic, but something about the case doesn't sit right with me. I wondered whether she ever came across your desk. Wanstead scratched his head. Lila Dane, you say? Rings no bell. But then, neither do half the names in those files. Let's have a look. He rose, rummaging through an ancient cabinet that squeaked in protest. Paper shuffled, dust drifted, and Wanstead muttered various assessments of bureaucratic incompetence. At last he slammed the drawer shut. Nothing, he declared. No Lila Dane, no Dane of any kind, not in domestic records, not in wartime operations, not in auxiliary files. Tommy frowned. Could she have used another name? Oh, plenty of women did, Wanstead said. Men too, for that matter. The number of aliases our service accumulated could populate a small village. Why? What's your interest? Tommy hesitated. Not enough to arouse suspicion, but enough to acknowledge a truth within himself. A woman visited my wife yesterday and kept pressing her about someone named Lila Dane. Claimed to know her past. I thought checking her out would be sensible. Peculiar? Wanstead repeated. What sort of peculiar? Hints about Tuppence's childhood, French summers, old acquaintances, things she's never mentioned. Wanstead gave him a long, considering look. You know, old boy, secrecy is rarely a one-sided affair, even between husbands and wives. Tommy chose not to answer. Wanstead sighed, returning to his desk. There is one thing, though. It's faint, little more than a rumour from back in 41. A whisper, really. Might be unrelated. But you mentioned France. Tommy leaned forward. Go on. There was talk of a young woman who did liaison work under a false identity. Very junior, very quiet. She operated under a code name only, one of those poetic ones the French were fond of, the Lavender Finch. The words landed softly, yet carried weight. Tommy felt the air thicken around him. The Lavender Finch, he repeated. Wanstead nodded. Never confirmed. No file. Nothing written. Just chatter among field agents. She was used for subtle insertion work. Small assignments, listening posts, social infiltration, French cafes, gatherings, that sort of thing. They said she had a knack for disappearing into a room. A clever girl, if she existed at all. Tommy's heartbeat quickened. Lavender. Finch. Was it coincidence, or something far more entwined with the strange events at home? "Why no file?" he asked. Wanstead shrugged. Some missions weren't documented. Some identities were invented for a single night and discarded with the empty glasses, and some were deliberately erased. Tommy absorbed that silently. "If you find mention of Lila Dane," Wanstead added, "be cautious. Names without records tend to lead to stories better left in the past." "I appreciate the warning," Tommy said, rising, "but unfortunately, the past appears to have arrived on my doorstep." Wanstead's moustache twitched. "Then keep your wits about you, and tell your wife Wanstead sends his regards." Tommy managed a tight smile. "I will." The walk home felt longer than usual. The city pulsed with its familiar hum, but Tommy heard none of it. His mind ran through every detail of the last 2 days, the broken cup, the blank letter scented with lavender, Mrs. Merriweather's confident intrusion, and above all the name, Lila Dane, spoken with such deliberate familiarity. Now, a new phrase floated among them like a spectre. The Lavender Finch. Could Tuppence, his Tuppence, have been involved in clandestine wartime work she had never spoken of? She had certainly been brave enough, quick enough, charming enough to slip past suspicion. But the thought of her bearing a secret identity, one touched with danger and erasure, jarred him in ways he did not yet understand. When he reached home, the afternoon sun slanted across the hallway carpet. The house was quiet, save for the faint clink of something in the sitting room. Tommy paused in the doorway. Tuppence sat on the floor by the low table, an open jewellery box before her. Not one of the usual ones containing brooches and pearls, but a small wooden case he hadn't seen in years, one she had packed away early in their marriage with a breezy remark about old, uninteresting trifles. Now she sifted through it intently. The moment she noticed him, she snapped the lid shut. "Oh," she exclaimed, laughing lightly, "you startled me. I was only looking for an old pair of earrings, thought they might be here." Tommy leaned against the doorframe casually. "Find them?" "No, nothing of use. Everything's dreadfully outdated." She rose briskly, brushing off her skirt. "Where have you been?" "Out," Tommy said simply. He crossed the room and lifted the jewellery box. She reached to take it from him, but he held it just out of her grasp for a moment, long enough to notice several folded letters inside, aged and yellowed at the edges. "You kept these," he remarked. "Sentimental reasons," she said too quickly. He opened one before she could stop him. The handwriting was elegant, looping, feminine, signed with a single sweeping letter, L. "School friend," Tuppence said lightly. She had dreadful penmanship, but she was terribly fond of flourishes. Tommy refolded the letter slowly, choosing not to challenge the obvious inconsistency. Instead, he asked, "What was her name?" Tuppence smiled a little too brightly. "Lydia. Lovely girl. Moved abroad. Lost touch." Tommy placed the box gently on the table. They stood in silence, a fragile veil between them. "Well then," she said, smoothing her skirt. "Shall we have tea?" He nodded, but the moment she left the room he reopened the box and examined the letters more closely. All were signed with that elegant L, but none contained a full name. The handwriting, while pretty, had an ornamental confidence to it, more like someone performing a persona rather than writing naturally. He shut the box quietly, his pulse steady but tense. A double life had begun to take shape, not in Tuppence, but in him, husband on one side, investigator on the other, and the line between them was blurring. Tommy Beresford had faced danger before, guns, codes, villains of every variety, but he had never navigated a mystery that threaded itself through the heart of his own home. Yet now, for the first time in years, he sensed the unmistakable truth. He must watch, he must deduce, he must follow every hint, even the ones his wife tried to hide, because something, or someone, from Tuppence's past had begun to stir, and if he didn't understand it soon, he feared it might tear the quiet fabric of their life apart. Tommy first noticed him because he didn't belong to the rhythm of the street. On an ordinary afternoon, their neighbourhood moved with a particular pattern: nannies guiding prams while exchanging bits of gossip, shop boys making deliveries on bicycles too small for their long legs, elderly men sweeping their steps with the same intention they brought to their weekly crosswords. But this man was different. He stood motionless across the road as though he'd planted himself there with deliberate purpose. Tommy, glancing out the sitting room window while pretending to search for the newspaper, saw him again. The man held a folded paper, but he wasn't reading it. His hat brim dipped low, shadowing most of his face, yet his stance, too still, too focused, betrayed him. His body angled slightly toward the Beresford house, as though listening for something only he could hear. "Tommy, have you seen the kitchen scissors?" Tuppence called from the next room. "Probably hiding from you," he replied, eyes narrowing at the watcher. The stranger shifted his weight. The movement was slight, but enough to reveal that he wasn't waiting for a bus or pausing before knocking at a neighbour's door. He was watching them. Tommy made up his mind instantly. Back in a tick. He crossed the hall, grabbed his coat and stepped outside. The moment his foot touched the pavement, the watcher lowered the newspaper and turned away. Tommy quickened his pace. The man began to walk. Tommy followed. 2 houses. 4. At the corner, the watcher slipped into the narrow service alley between a grocer's shop and a tailor's. Tommy reached it only seconds later. Empty. The alley stretched no more than 10 yards before turning sharply toward the row of communal dustbins. No doors opened onto it, no side exits allowed escape. And yet, the watcher was gone without so much as an echo of footsteps. Tommy stood very still. Someone trained could move like that. Someone accustomed to vanishing from view, blending into corners, using silence as a tool. A thief? A spy? A messenger? Or perhaps a threat? He returned home slowly, replaying what he had seen. The man wasn't hostile, he thought. His posture didn't carry menace. Instead, it carried urgency. A man searching rather than stalking. But whom? And why? Inside, Tuppence poured tea at the small round table, stirring with quick, unnecessary motions. Her spoon clattered against the china a fraction too long. "Did you find them?" she asked when Tommy entered. "What?" "The scissors." "Oh, no, I didn't look." He hung his coat, studying her. She avoided his eyes. He sat opposite her. "We had a visitor outside." "A visitor?" Her tone was airy, but the spoon in her hand stilled. "A man, across the street. He wasn't admiring the view." She laughed softly, too softly. "Really, Tommy, our house isn't that interesting." "He was watching," Tommy said. "And when I approached him, he disappeared into thin air." Her shoulders stiffened, only a touch but enough. Then she set down the spoon with a small clink. "Tommy, you're getting jumpy. Ever since that ridiculous blank letter, you've been inventing dangers." "Tuppence," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "I'm not inventing anything." Her gaze flicked, oh so briefly, toward the front window, just enough to confirm she already knew the man was there. But instead of acknowledging it, she rose briskly. "I'm going to sort the linen cupboard. It's become a dreadful mess." She left without waiting for his reply. Tommy watched her go, feeling the divide widening between them, a small, invisible line stretching taut. He didn't know whether it frightened him more that Tuppence seemed to be hiding something, or that whatever she hid was beginning to seep into their peaceful life with cold, deliberate steps. Later that afternoon, when Tuppence went out to purchase buttons, Albert came bounding into the sitting room with an envelope in his hand. "Another one, sir." His voice dropped conspiratorially. "Delivered just now." Tommy took it. Heavy paper again. Expensive. Familiar. He opened it with deliberate care. Inside lay a single typed line. "You can't run from the past forever." He folded it once, twice, sliding it into his pocket before Albert could peer over his shoulder. "Did you see who brought it?" Albert nodded eagerly. "Not the same fellow as before, sir, but similar sort. Tall, hat pulled down, looked like he didn't much want to be seen." "What direction did he go?" "Toward the butcher's, but he was gone before I got the door half open." Tommy appreciated Albert's eagerness, even as worry curled tighter in his gut. He studied the hall mirror, assessing himself the way he used to before stepping into an assignment. He didn't like what he saw, not age or weariness, but that nagging sense of duplicity, the secretiveness required to protect Tuppence from dangers she refused to confess. He put a hand on the mantel, steadying himself. When Tuppence returned, cheeks flushed from the wind and hands full of button cards she clearly hadn't needed, Tommy masked his thoughts behind a cheerful facade. "How about we go out tonight?" he suggested. "There's a lecture at the village hall, some chap rambling on about his adventures cataloguing rare birds." Tuppence paused, then smiled. "You? Birds? That's a new enthusiasm." "I'm expanding my horizons. Besides, it will be nice to hear nonsense spoken deliberately." She laughed, and the sound eased him. For a moment. The village hall smelled faintly of polished wood and pipe smoke. Rows of chairs faced a small stage, where a stout man in tweed was already arranging slides of unremarkable birds with solemn importance. Villagers murmured happily, greeting one another, settling into familiar patterns of attendance. Tommy and Tuppence took seats near the aisle. Their conversation drifted lightly, about Mrs. Horsham's dreadful new hat, the rumour of the grocer's impending retirement, Albert's theory that he could become a stage actor if given the chance. Tuppence laughed at all the right places, but Tommy saw the faint tension around her eyes. The lecture began. A slide of a perfectly ordinary pigeon illuminated the screen, prompting a round of appreciative nods. Tommy leaned back and saw him, 3 rows behind, the watcher, the same man, or so Tommy believed. The hat was different, the coat plainer, but the eyes were unmistakable, dark, urgent, intent, not filled with malice but with something sharper, warning, perhaps, or desperation. The man watched not the lecture, nor the villagers, but Tuppence. Tommy's breath caught. He turned his head minutely. The watcher met his gaze for the briefest second, not with hostility, but with an almost pleading intensity, before looking away. Tommy leaned toward Tuppence. "Don't turn around." "Why?" she whispered. "He's here." Her hand tightened on her lap. "Who?" "The man from this afternoon." She inhaled sharply, but when Tommy reached for her hand, she drew it back under the guise of adjusting her program. The watcher rose quietly halfway through a particularly dull slide on sparrows. He slipped down the aisle and disappeared through the rear exit. Tommy nearly followed, but Tuppence placed a hand on his sleeve. Not a plea, not a command, but something between the two. "Stay," she murmured. He stayed, but he did not stop watching her. The lecture ended with polite applause. Villagers gathered their coats. Someone congratulated the lecturer with exaggerated enthusiasm. Tommy and Tuppence stepped outside into the cool night air. "Let's walk home," she suggested. They strolled along the pavement, silent at first. Lamps glowed warm in cottage windows. The world felt safe, almost cozy, except it wasn't. Finally, Tommy said, "He wasn't threatening you." Tuppence's pace slowed. "What makes you say that?" There was something in his eyes, not danger, something closer to urgency. "Tommy," she said gently, "you're reading too much into strangers." "No," he answered. "I'm reading just enough." She stopped walking. For a moment she looked as though she might speak, truly speak the way she used to before the past became a shadow between them. But then she smiled, bright, charming, impenetrable. "You do worry so beautifully," she said, looping her arm through his. "Come along, home." And as they walked, Tommy felt the truth tightening like a noose. The man wasn't hunting Tuppence. He was looking for her. And if a stranger watched her with such urgency, one chilling possibility crept into Tommy's mind. Perhaps Tuppence wasn't the one in danger. Perhaps Tuppence herself once was the danger. The antique shop hid itself so effectively that Tommy might have missed it entirely had the watcher not turned down the street only moments before. The place occupied the lower floor of a narrow brick building, its windows crowded with tarnished silver frames, porcelain dogs, old quills, and every sort of object designed to catch the eye of those who preferred the past to the present. A faded sign hung above the door, swaying faintly though there was no wind. Tommy hesitated on the threshold. He had followed the watcher discreetly, certain the man would lead him somewhere meaningful. Instead, the fellow had disappeared around a corner, leaving Tommy with nothing but a sense of unfinished purpose, and the sudden appearance of this shop. Perhaps coincidence, perhaps not. Tommy's instinct urged him inside. A bell tinkled as he entered. The shop smelled of beeswax, old paper, and the faint sweetness of dried lavender. That last scent prickled his skin. He scanned the dim interior. Cabinets lined the walls, each displaying items far older than the building itself. A man emerged from behind a curtain, thin, bespectacled, with the air of someone who knew the value of secrets as well as antiques. "Good afternoon, sir," the shopkeeper said. "Looking for anything in particular?" Tommy approached the nearest display. "Information mostly, and perhaps a curiosity or two." "We have no shortage of curiosities," the man replied with a mild smile. "Everything in here comes with a story, some delightful, some tragic, and some best left unspoken." Tommy's eye drifted to a writing desk tucked into a corner, French walnut, early 19th century, faintly scarred at the edges. A small price tag hung from the drawer handle. "Ah," the shopkeeper said, noticing Tommy's interest. "A recent acquisition. Came from an estate sale in France. Belonged to a rather private household. The desk, I mean, not the sale." Tommy approached it slowly. Something tugged at his memory. Tuppence's childhood letters, the elegant script signed with a lonely looping L, the references to summers abroad. The desk looked ordinary enough, yet his instincts whispered otherwise. "May I?" Tommy asked. "Of course." He slid open the main drawer. Empty. The next one held only a broken quill. The lowest drawer resisted slightly, then gave way with a soft click. Inside lay nothing but old felt lining. "French desks," the shopkeeper observed, "often have hidden compartments. No one makes furniture like that anymore." Tommy's pulse quickened. He ran his fingers along the back panel and felt a faint ridge. Pressing gently, he heard a soft release, followed by the shifting of wood. A small square compartment popped open. Inside was a photograph. Tommy lifted it into the light. His breath stalled. A young woman stared back at him, serene, poised, her head tilted slightly as though regarding the photographer with unguarded confidence. Her features were unmistakable. The same shape of eyes, the same determined chin, the same faint arch of the eyebrow. It was not Tuppence, and yet it could have been her twin. Tommy's fingers tightened around the edge of the photograph. "Who is this?" The shopkeeper leaned over, adjusting his spectacles. "No idea. It was in the desk when we bought it. Likely left there by accident. Happens often with estate pieces. People forget what they store in old furniture." Tommy stared at the image again. The uncanny resemblance unnerved him in a way words could not describe. Tuppence had never mentioned a cousin abroad, never hinted at a familial double, and yet the woman in the photograph looked as though she might walk into their home and be mistaken for Tuppence at first glance. He slid the photograph into his coat. "I'll take the desk." The shopkeeper blinked. "The desk?" "Yes. How much?" After arranging payment and delivery, Tommy stepped back into the street. The watcher was nowhere in sight, once again vanished like smoke. But the photograph weighed in Tommy's pocket like a stone. Tuppence was in the sitting room when he returned home, arranging a vase of flowers with meticulous care. She looked up, smiling. "You took your time. Where wandered you off to this afternoon?" Tommy removed his coat. "An errand. Found something interesting." Her eyes sharpened imperceptibly. "Oh?" He reached into his pocket, extracted the photograph, and placed it on the table between them. Tuppence froze. It was not a theatrical freeze, not the kind used to indicate shock or astonishment. This freeze was silent, deep, the kind that seeped into her posture and drained her colour. Tommy watched her hand tighten around the rim of the vase until her knuckles blanched. "Tommy," she whispered, "where did you get this?" "In an antique shop, inside a hidden compartment." He studied her closely. "Do you know her?" Tuppence's mouth opened and closed. Then she forced a smile, strained, fragile. "A distant cousin, on my mother's side. I never met her. The family resemblance must be stronger than I realized." Tommy felt the lie immediately. Tuppence rarely lied directly. She deflected, she teased, she omitted. But she almost never stated an untruth with deliberate clarity. Tonight, she had. "A cousin," he repeated. "Yes," she said quickly. Too quickly. He reached for her hand, but she withdrew it under the guise of fixing a flower. "Tommy, really, it's nothing. Just an old photograph. Someone must have tucked it away ages ago." "Perhaps," he said, but the weight in his chest deepened. She fled the room moments later on the pretext of needing fresh air. Tommy heard the front door close behind her. Minutes became 30. 30 became a full hour. He checked the garden, the kitchen, the side gate. Nothing. 2 hours passed. When she finally returned, her hair was barely mussed, her shoes suspiciously spotless. "Went for a walk," she said lightly. "Much needed. You know how fresh air clears my mind." "It wasn't raining," Tommy replied. "Well, thank goodness. I hate wet hair." She breezed past him, humming under her breath, but her brightness had edges now, sharp, frantic edges that betrayed more than she intended. Tommy remained in the hall, staring at the door she had re-entered through. Each new clue tightened a net around his thoughts. The stranger woman, the watcher, the lavender scent, the photograph, Tuppence's evasive behaviour. Was she protecting him, or concealing something far more sinister than a cousin long forgotten? Later that evening, after Tuppence retired early claiming a dreadful headache, Tommy walked through the quiet house. His steps slowed near the front door. Something was on the floor, a folded note. He lifted it, unfolded it, and read the single line, "She knows you're looking." A chill threaded down his spine. Someone had been inside, someone close enough, silent enough to slip a message beneath their door without alerting Albert or Tuppence. Tommy stood very still, the note trembling in his fingers. There was no signature, no mark, no scent this time. Only a warning, sharp, precise, impossible to ignore. He turned toward the darkened hallway leading to the bedroom where Tuppence slept, or pretended to sleep. Who was she afraid of? Or worse, who was afraid of her? He extinguished the sitting room lamp, pocketed the note, and locked the front door with care. Tomorrow, he promised himself, he would dig deeper. No more gentle questions, no more polite patience. The past had taken shape, vague, threatening, and disturbingly familiar. And somewhere within it, someone was watching them both. Tommy Beresford had never imagined he would one day shadow his own wife through the streets of London. Yet here he was, coat collar lifted, hat angled low, steps measured so precisely that old instincts stirred in him like ghosts waking from a long rest. Tuppence had announced her plans with deliberate brightness over breakfast. She meant to go shopping in Kensington, look at hats, inspect fabrics, and perhaps hunt for a new pair of gloves she absolutely did not need. "Shall I come along?" Tommy had asked. "Oh no," she said too swiftly. "You'd only complain about the mirrors." A joke, but her eyes had swerved away from his. She kissed him lightly, grabbed her handbag, and called goodbye over her shoulder. Tommy waited precisely 4 minutes and followed. From the start, it was clear she had no interest in shopping. She passed the milliner's, strode past the row of dress shops, ignored the bookstore she usually could not resist. Her pace was brisk, purposeful, not at all the meandering stroll of a woman entertaining the idea of gloves. Tommy kept his distance. The city moved with its usual arguments, rumbling buses, and newspaper vendors calling out headlines. Tuppence threaded through it gracefully, as though pulled forward by a private urgency. She reached Hyde Park and slipped through the gates without hesitation. Tommy followed, pulse tightening. The park at midday held a curious hush. Most of the benches sat empty, save for the occasional nursemaid or solitary reader. Tuppence cut away from the main paths, heading toward a quiet grove where tall trees stood close together and sheltered a patch of worn grass. Then she stopped. She wasn't alone. The watcher stood a few paces from her, hands in his coat pockets, posture tense but not threatening. Tommy's breath caught. He ducked behind a wide oak and strained to hear. "You're running out of time," the watcher said, voice low but clear. French accent, controlled, deliberate. They found the photograph. Tuppence's reply trembled barely at the edges. "I never wanted Tommy involved." Tommy felt the ground shift beneath him. The words struck him harder than any blow. The watcher leaned closer. "You should have told him years ago." "I couldn't," her voice cracked. "You know why?" Tommy's ribs tightened. Heat rose behind his eyes, a mixture of confusion, fear, and something far uglier. Betrayal? No, not betrayal, but a wound all the same. The watcher sighed. "He will find out everything soon, whether you tell him or not." Tuppence turned away, pressing a hand to her forehead. "I thought the past had died. I thought it would stay buried." "Nothing stays buried," the man said. "Not when someone has reason to dig." Tommy leaned too far forward, snapped a twig beneath his shoe and froze. The watcher's head jerked. Tuppence stiffened. "I have to go," she whispered. "Tuppence!" But she was already leaving, walking briskly back toward the main path, her movements tight with distress. The watcher lingered a moment, scanning the trees. Tommy stepped from behind the oak. "You," he said firmly. The watcher jerked again, then bolted. Tommy sprinted after him. They tore through the grass, weaving past startled passers-by. The watcher was fast, astonishingly so, but desperation fueled Tommy's stride. The chase cut across a footpath, around a clump of yews, down a sloping hill. The watcher dashed toward a locked maintenance gate at the perimeter. He rattled it. Trapped. Tommy closed in. "Stop!" he barked. "We're going to talk." The watcher held up his hands, not in surrender, but in appeal. Up close, Tommy saw the man's features clearly for the first time. Sharp cheekbones, tired eyes, and a look of anxious determination rather than menace. "I mean no harm," the man said quietly. "Not to you, not to her." "Then why are you following my wife?" Tommy demanded. The man exhaled sharply. "Because I must." "Who are you?" A beat of hesitation, then, "Henri Valois, French intelligence." Tommy's jaw tightened. "Well, that's convenient." "It's the truth," Valois insisted. "Your wife is in danger." "She seems to think you are the danger." "No." Valois stepped closer. "Mr. Beresford, listen to me carefully. The past she hides is not shameful, but it is perilous, if misunderstood." Tommy swallowed against the rising ache in his chest. "Start explaining." "No," Valois said grimly. "Not here. Not yet. You are being watched, both of you, by someone far more dangerous than me. Someone who knows what she once did. Someone who never forgave it." "What did she do?" Tommy asked, voice tightening. "You will know soon," Valois said. "But she should have told you first. That is the part I cannot help." Before Tommy could react, Valois vaulted the gate with startling agility, dropped to the pavement on the far side, and disappeared into the crowd. Tommy pushed at the gate. It remained locked. By the time he reached the nearest opening, Valois was gone. Tommy's heart pounded as he walked back toward the park. His mind reeled. Tuppence's voice echoed in him. I never wanted Tommy involved. Not fear of a villain, fear of him knowing. He felt something inside him strain, a thread pulled tight. When Tommy returned home, the house was quiet. The sitting room glowed with the amber flicker of a modest fire. And there sat Tuppence, calm, composed, sewing of all things, a bit of embroidery she had abandoned years ago because she declared it too fiddly for a woman with a perfectly healthy sense of impatience. She looked up at him, smiling faintly. "You're home early." Tommy removed his gloves slowly. "Yes, thought I'd surprise you." She returned to her needlework. A bluebird took shape beneath her careful stitches. "Did you find anything nice in Kensington?" Tommy asked lightly. "Oh, nothing much. Everything's frightfully overpriced." Her tone was breezy, but her hands were too steady, unnaturally so, a serenity crafted rather than genuine. Tommy sat opposite her. For a moment, all he did was listen, the soft tick of the clock, the faint crackle of the fire, the whisper of the fabric as she pulled her needle through. Ordinary sounds, domestic sounds, and yet they struck him now with painful fragility. "Tuppence," he said quietly, "where did you really go today?" Her needle paused, just a heartbeat, but enough. "I told you," she replied softly. "Shopping." Tommy leaned forward. "I followed you." The words landed between them like a dropped stone. Tuppence looked up, eyes wide, something raw flickering across her face before the composure returned. "Tommy, why on earth would you do that?" "Because," he said, forcing the words out evenly, "I needed answers, and you weren't giving me any." She lowered the embroidery frame. "Tommy, please." "Who was the man you met?" he pressed. "Who is he to you? And why did he say you're running out of time?" She closed her eyes briefly as though gathering strength. "You shouldn't have followed me." "I had to." "No," she whispered. "You didn't." Tommy stood abruptly and paced to the mantel. He braced his hands against it. "Tuppence, I've tried to be patient. I've tried to trust that you'd tell me when you were ready. But this isn't small. This isn't trivial. You're frightened, and I don't know why." Silence. Long, heavy. At last he turned back to her. "Who is Lila Dane?" The name struck her like a blow. Her needle fell from her hand and clattered softly onto the rug. She did not look away. She did not deflect. She did not smile. Instead, for the first time in days, Tuppence dropped the mask entirely. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was low and steady. "She was me," she said. "Once." Tommy felt the world narrow around that single confession. The clock ticked. The fire whispered. His heartbeat filled the spaces between them. Tuppence held his gaze, her eyes bright with secrets long locked away. "Yes," she said. "Lila Dane. I was her, before I ever became Tuppence Beresford." And though she said nothing more, the room seemed to fill at once with all the things she had not yet spoken: danger, deception, regret, and a past that was no longer willing to remain buried. For a long moment after Tuppence spoke, the room seemed to hold its breath. The fire crackled softly, casting shifting shadows across the walls, and yet the stillness between Tommy and Tuppence was absolute, charged, waiting, fragile as spun glass. Tommy remained motionless near the mantel, one hand braced against the cool surface as though to steady himself against the impact of her words. "She was me, once." Tuppence did not look away. Her posture was calm, but her eyes shimmered with the weight of years she had chosen never to reveal. Tommy crossed the room slowly and sat opposite her. The embroidery frame rested forgotten in her lap. "Tuppence," he said quietly, "start at the beginning." She exhaled, a thin thread of breath. "I never wanted you to know. It was such a foolish, reckless thing I did, and I believed it belonged to another life entirely. Before we met, before I became who I am with you." "Who were you?" he asked gently. She folded her hands together to still their tremor. "Lila Dane was the name they gave me. The Lavender Finch was the code name." Tommy blinked. "Finch," he repeated softly. She winced. "Yes, I recognized it at once." "Tell me," he urged. "Everything." Tuppence looked into the fire as though searching for her younger self somewhere among the flickering embers. "It began in France," she said. "A summer that should have been unremarkable. My mother had distant ties to a family there. I was hardly more than a girl, curious, reckless, far too eager for a taste of the world." Her tone softened, wistful, haunted. "I learned French quickly. I charmed easily in those days. And I met people, young men and women who moved through the city with secrets tucked into their pockets. They were unofficial, unregistered, the sort who took on small tasks for the struggling remnants of resistance networks. Nothing grand, nothing official, but dangerous enough." Tommy studied her. "And you joined them?" "I wanted to help," she said simply. "Or perhaps I simply wanted to feel important. They needed someone who could be overlooked in a crowd. A girl who appeared harmless, who could slip into cafes, listen, observe, pass messages without suspicion. That's how I became the Lavender Finch." "Because of the perfume?" Tommy asked. She nodded. "It was silly, really. I wore a lavender scent constantly back then. One of the men gave me the nickname, said I perched quietly, listening to everything, like a little finch." Her lips twisted. "I thought it was romantic. I was 18. Tommy swallowed. "And the girl in the photograph?" Tuppence closed her eyes. "Her name was Colette Moreau. She was the real one, the one whose life I borrowed. She resembled me, or I resembled her, enough that when they needed someone to pose as her for a single meeting with a smuggling contact, they asked me." "What sort of smuggling?" "Information, codes, and sometimes jewels or papers needed to bribe officials. It was a messy network, unregulated and full of its own internal betrayals. I didn't understand the half of it at the time." "And Colette?" Tommy pressed. Tuppence's voice dropped to a whisper. "That's the part I never spoke of. The meeting went well enough. I passed as her without trouble. But the next day, she was found dead." Tommy inhaled sharply. "Good Lord." "She was strangled, left in an alley near the river. And the men we worked with, well, they suspected everyone. No one trusted anyone. They feared a traitor had exposed her. And because I had impersonated her, some believed I had drawn attention. Others believed I had been the intended target and she died in my place. I never found out the truth." She clasped her hands tightly. I fled France the next day. Mother had been furious when I returned home so abruptly. She never knew why. I shut the door on it. I swore never to speak of it again. Tommy felt a rush of conflicting emotions, admiration for her bravery, sorrow for the fear she had carried alone, and a prickling dread for the dangers now resurfacing. And the man who said he would find you someday? Tuppence's breath caught. He was the leader of the smuggling ring, or at least the educated, elegant man who gave the orders. They called him Le Colombe. The dove, Tommy murmured. Yes, a charming monster if there ever was one. He confronted me after Colette's death, accused me of something, I never knew what. He said one day he would come for the truth. Her voice trembled. And now he has. Tommy leaned forward. The blank letter, Mrs. Merriweather, the watcher, the photograph, all of it, the work of the dove. I believe so, she said faintly, or someone working for him. Tommy raked this feeler hand through his hair. Then we must go to the police, or to British intelligence. No, Tuppence said immediately. This is not something the authorities can untangle. Too many unofficial threads. Too much that never existed on paper. They would only see a frightened housewife with a wild story of a dead girl and a vanished network. And yet, Tommy said, I can't shake the feeling something is about to happen. Tuppence blinked. What? Only then did Tommy realize he had not told her about the coming danger. Almost on cue, as though summoned by the weight of their conversation, a sharp crack sounded against the front door window. Tuppence gasped and leapt to her feet. Tommy raced to the entrance. Glass littered the foyer floor. A small stone lay amid the shards. Tied to it was a scrap of paper. Tommy untangled it quickly. The finch must sing. Tuppence's face drained of all colour. Tommy placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. We're dealing with someone who knows exactly who you were. There's no more doubt. She pressed a hand to her throat. Then he's here, in London. Tommy guided her back into the sitting room, closing the curtains firmly. Tuppence, listen to me. Whatever you faced then, you are not alone now. I won't let anything happen to you. Her eyes shone with gratitude and fear in equal measure. Tommy, you shouldn't have to face this because of me. I married all of you, he said gently, even the parts I didn't know about. She gave a soft, broken laugh. Not quite what the vicar meant, but I'll accept it. He sat beside her. Tell me the rest. Everything. We cannot fight what we do not understand. She shook her head. There isn't much more. After Colette died, the network disbanded. Some vanished, some were arrested, others fled. But the dove, he slipped through every net. I thought he had forgotten me. But someone clearly hasn't, Tommy murmured. Tuppence drew her shawl tighter. The dove was meticulous. He noticed everything. If he is involved, then he knows we are together. He knows where we live, and he knows how to unsettle me. Tommy looked at the message again. He wants you frightened. No, she corrected. He wants something from me. Tommy frowned. Information? Revenge? I don't know, Tuppence whispered. But the lavender finch was only useful because she was silent. If he says the finch must sing, he wants me to talk. About what? Her eyes filled with dread. Something I don't remember, or something I never knew. Tommy took her hand. Then we'll find it together. Her fingers tightened around his. Tommy, are you angry with me for not telling you sooner? He hesitated, not because he doubted his answer, but because the truth of it came with enough complexity to fill an entire lifetime. I'm not angry, he said softly, but I am afraid. Afraid that someone has woven himself into your past and now aims to thread himself into our present, and afraid that you felt you had to hide this from me at all. Tuppence leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture so small and vulnerable that it struck him deeply. I wanted to protect you. Tommy kissed her hair. We protect each other. That's how it's always been. Before either of them could say more, a sudden gust rattled the door again. Not a stone this time, but the wind catching the broken pane. The sound made both of them flinch. Tommy rose. We'll board this up for tonight. Tomorrow, we take steps. What steps? Tuppence asked. Whatever steps are needed, he said grimly. We're not dealing with coincidence anymore. This is deliberate, coordinated. and escalating. Tuppence sank onto the sofa, staring at the torn message. "The Finch must sing." Tommy crossed the room and gently took the paper from her. "Well," he said with quiet determination, "if the Finch is going to sing, she won't be singing alone." And as the fire sputtered low and the shadows drew longer across the walls, Tommy Beresford realized something with a jolt of icy clarity. This was not merely a threat. This was a hunt. And Tuppence, his clever, fearless Tuppence, had stepped back into a world that had never forgiven her for leaving it. Tommy had always believed that he and Tuppence worked best when thrown into danger together. The world sharpened around them. The dull routines of daily life fell away. Their minds clicked in perfect tandem. And so, after days of secrets and half-truths, something unexpected happened the morning after Tuppence revealed her past. They began to work side by side again, not as husband and wife navigating a peculiar marital storm, not as two people burdened by fear and memory, but as partners, the kind they had always been when the stakes grew perilous. Tuppence sat at the dining table, posture straight, pen poised over a fresh notebook. Tommy stood at the sideboard studying a map of London he had pinned against the wood with 2 salt shakers. "We must begin where everything converges," he said. "The Dove." Tuppence shivered faintly at the name. He loved symbols, birds especially, claimed they were the only creatures who crossed borders without suspicion. She tapped her pen. He once said that people were like flowers, rooted until someone cut them and carried them away. Tommy grimaced. "Sounds like a poet with poor morals." "Precisely," Tuppence replied. "Elegant, aloof, persuasive, and dangerous. He gave orders with the tone of someone suggesting a change of wallpaper. You barely felt the death sentence coming." Tommy turned. "Do you think he's truly here in London?" "Yes," she said simply. "Everything points to it, the letters, the symbols, the photograph, and Mrs. Merriweather." Tommy raised an eyebrow. "You believe she's involved?" Tuppence hesitated. "She resembles someone I knew in France, a woman who styled herself as an arts patroness but spent more time listening than speaking. Hair was darker then, her accent was different, but people reinvent themselves so easily." "And the Dove," Tommy said, "loved reinvention." Tuppence nodded. Albert entered with tea, glancing curiously at the map and the array of notes scattered across the table. "Shall I put the kettle on again if you're planning another case?" he asked hopefully. "Perhaps," Tommy said. "But keep this quiet, Albert." Albert puffed up proudly. "Discretion is my middle name." It was not, but they let it pass. When Albert left, Tommy lowered his voice. "So, where does one find a cosmopolitan shadow figure in London today?" Tuppence flipped through her notebook. "If he has loyalists or former contacts, they will gather in places that feel like neutral ground, but are bound by nostalgia. French ones, perhaps." Tommy pointed at her with admiration. "Exactly what I was thinking. There's the French Cultural Society in Mayfair, known for lectures, soirees, and gatherings where half the room speaks in code, even when they claim they're discussing modern theatre." Tuppence leaned forward. "Do they still host formal evenings?" "One tonight, actually. A fundraising gala." A spark lit Tuppence's eyes, the spark Tommy recognized from every case they had ever taken on. Fear mixed with determination. "Then we should go," he hesitated. "It could be dangerous." "Dangerous?" Tuppence scoffed softly. "Tommy dear, everything is dangerous now. At least tonight we would be on the offensive." He smiled despite himself. "Then we'll attend." The French Cultural Society occupied a magnificent townhouse in Mayfair. Cream stone, wrought iron balconies, tall windows glowing with warm candlelight. Carriages and motorcars lined the street. Guests stepped out in elegant attire, cloaks trimmed with fur, gloves smooth and immaculate, each carrying an air of significance. Tommy and Tuppence approached slowly. She wore a deep garnet gown, her hair swept into a simple knot that revealed the graceful curve of her neck. Tommy had always admired how she carried herself, too self-aware to be timid, too quick-witted to be intimidated. Yet tonight, beneath her poise, an undercurrent of tension rippled. "Ready?" Tommy murmured. "Quite," she said, slipping her hand into his arm. "But keep your eyes open. Everyone here could be someone from before, or someone working for him." Inside, the townhouse unfolded in chandeliers, polished floors, velvet drapery, and the distinct mingling of French and English chatter. A quartet played a discreet melody. Waiters moved with fluid efficiency, offering champagne to clusters of guests engrossed in elegant gossip. Tommy squeezed Tuppence's hand. "Do you recognize anyone?" She scanned the room slowly, her gaze lingering on certain faces. Perhaps. Hard to tell under all the sophistication. They drifted through the space like any other married couple enjoying a cultured evening, but beneath the surface their senses sharpened. A pair of men stood near a tall potted palm. "The Finch resurfacing," one murmured in French. Tommy nearly stumbled, the other nodded. Impossible to predict the final account, but they say he has prepared everything. Tommy moved Tuppence discreetly away. "Did you hear that?" "Yes," she murmured, "and I recognize that man, the older one. He once handled coded telegrams near Lyon, but he never knew who I really was. The Dove rarely told anyone anything." "We should tread carefully," Tommy said. Tuppence nodded. A small salon opened to their left, arranged like a museum exhibit of French culture. Books, maps, small artifacts, and delicately arranged perfume displays stood beneath glass domes. Tuppence paused before one. A series of lavender flacons, 5 in total, stood upon a mirrored tray. One was missing. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Tommy." He saw it instantly. Someone took it. "The scent of the letter," she said. "The scent the Dove always preferred his women to wear." Something inside Tommy tightened. "Then he is here, or close." They proceeded deeper into the soiree. Every conversation seemed to carry 2 meanings. Every smile felt a shade too polished. Every nod from a passing gentleman seemed to say, "We see you more clearly than we admit." In the ballroom, dancers glided gracefully across marble. Tuppence's posture stiffened. "What is it?" Tommy murmured. "That woman," she whispered, indicating a tall figure in gold silk. "The way she holds herself. I swear I have seen her before, at the Dove's gatherings. She used to sit near him with a notebook." "Do you think she recognizes you?" "She hasn't looked directly at me yet," Tuppence said, "but she will." They circled away. Tommy felt sweat prickle at the back of his neck, not from fear, but from the strain of containing it. They stepped briefly into the gallery hall, where framed sketches of Paris lined the walls. Soft light glowed against cream plaster and ornate sconces. A shadow slipped behind them. Tommy spun. Valois. Henri Valois appeared, breath slightly uneven as though he had arrived in haste. His expression was drawn tight with concern. "You should not be here," he murmured. "We had to come," Tommy said. "We need answers." Valois cast a sharp glance around them. "Listen to me carefully. You must stay in the open among the crowd. Do not wander off." "Why?" Tuppence demanded. "Because—" He lowered his voice to a whisper. "The Dove is here tonight." Tuppence's face drained of colour. "Are you certain?" "Yes." Valois's gaze softened with sympathy. "He knew you would come. This entire event. It is no accident he appears on this particular night." Tommy's fists tightened. "Where is he?" Valois shook his head. "Hidden, watching, choosing his moment." "Why warn us?" Tommy asked. "If you are truly on our side, why not arrest him?" Valois's eyes darkened. "You cannot arrest a ghost, and the Dove is more phantom than man, even to us." With that, he slipped away into the crowd, leaving Tommy and Tuppence standing close enough that their shoulders touched, their breathing synchronized with a mixture of adrenaline and dread. Tommy looked at her. "Stay near me." She nodded. The soiree deepened. The music swelled. The air thickened with perfume and uncertainty. Conversations turned sharper, eyes darting more frequently toward the balcony above the ballroom. Tommy and Tuppence moved strategically, observing each face, each whisper. They noted the missing perfume bottle, the coded phrases, the shifting glances of guests who recognized too much. Finally, at the height of the evening, the lights flickered. A single shudder ran through the hall. Then, silence. Not a panicked silence. Not yet. Something quieter. A collective inhale. The chandeliers regained their glow, but dimmer now, casting the room in an amber half-light. And then he appeared. A figure stepped onto the balcony overlooking the ballroom. Tall, impeccably dressed in midnight black, wearing a Venetian-style half-mask that concealed the upper half of his face, a white flower pinned to his lapel, gloves smooth as ivory. The Dove. Tuppence's grip on Tommy's arm tightened painfully, but she did not look away. Tommy felt the hairs on his neck rise. The masked figure rested one hand lightly on the balcony rail, observing the crowd as though selecting prey from a flock. Through the mask's narrow slits, his eyes scanned the crowd with cold amusement. Tommy whispered, "He's searching." Tuppence whispered back, "He's remembering." The Dove tilted his head in a manner both graceful and predatory, and Tommy understood in that moment that nothing about this was random. Nothing forgotten had remained buried. The lavender finch had resurfaced. The Dove had come to reclaim her story, and the next move would be his. The room fell into a hush so complete that the music seemed to retreat into the walls. The masked figure on the balcony, the Dove, rested one gloved hand on the iron railing, surveying the crowd below with leisurely menace. His voice, when it came, was soft enough to force the entire hall to lean in. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, "tonight is a night of revelation." The words dropped like stones into still water. Tuppence's breath hitched. Tommy felt her hand trembling in his. "Stay by me," he whispered. But Tuppence's eyes were fixed on the balcony, fixed on the past that had returned in a shape more theatrical and horrifying than memory alone could conjure. She pulled her hand free. "Tuppence." "I have to know," she whispered. Before he could stop her, she slipped into the edges of the crowd, disappearing between gowns and tuxedos like a wisp of smoke. Tommy swore under his breath and pushed after her. Above them, the Dove continued speaking in riddles, each phrase sharpened for effect. "Old debts," he said, "old disguises, old birds taking flight again." But Tommy barely heard him. He shoved past a waiter, skirted a column, and spotted Tuppence at the far archway, already ascending the sweeping staircase to the upper corridor. "Tuppence!" he called. She did not turn. He ran. The corridor upstairs was quieter, dimmer. Here, the music below was only a muffled hum. 2 long gallery halls stretched in opposite directions. Tuppence vanished down the left passage. Tommy followed, heart hammering, not only from fear of danger, but from the dawning, nauseating truth that the Dove had been waiting for this moment, that he had orchestrated it. He reached the gallery and skidded to a halt. Tuppence stood in the centre of the long room, framed by portraits of French writers and revolutionaries. The tall windows revealed the dark sweep of Mayfair beyond, and facing her, calm, elegant, mask removed, stood the Dove. He was older, yes, but unmistakably the man Tuppence had described. Refined posture, educated bearing, expression touched with detached amusement. His silver hair gleamed beneath the sconces. His eyes were as cold as polished stones. "Tuppence," Tommy breathed. Neither of them noticed him at first. "Tuppence," the Dove said, voice smooth as lacquer. "You should not have come tonight." She lifted her chin. "And you should not have followed me across a continent. We all make mistakes." He smiled faintly. "Ah, but my dear Finch, you were always worth following." Tommy's stomach tightened at the intimacy in the villain's tone. Something rehearsed, perhaps, yet unsettlingly familiar. "You murdered Colette," Tuppence said, her voice trembling with emotion rather than fear. "You used her. You used all of us." "Colette was a liability," he replied dismissively. "She played a role poorly. You, however," his gaze softened, "you played yours exceptionally. Such promise wasted on morality." Tuppence recoiled. "I never worked for you. I worked against you." The Dove chuckled. "Did you? I remember it differently." Tommy stepped forward. "I don't care what you remember. Move away from her." The Dove turned his head slowly, as though acknowledging a minor interruption in a private performance. "Ah, Mr. Beresford, the devoted husband." Tuppence took a step toward Tommy, but the Dove lifted a hand. "No," he said softly. "Let him come closer. It will be easier this way." "Easier for what?" Tommy demanded. "For him to see you clearly," the Dove murmured. "To see the truth you never told him." Tuppence stiffened. "Don't." The Dove withdrew a slim folder from his coat. "Tell me, Mr. Beresford, has she told you about this?" Tuppence's face drained. "It's a lie." The Dove opened the folder, revealing copies of handwritten notes, coded messages, and a small identification card. All of it looked old, weathered, and official enough to unsettle even the steadiest mind. "Here," the Dove said, offering the file to Tommy, "is her agreement to cooperate with my network. Her signature, her code reports, proof that she supported the smuggling ring." Tommy froze. Tuppence spun toward him. "Tommy, no! Listen to me. This is exactly what he wants." But the damage struck instantly. Even knowing this man was a manipulator, even seeing the wicked satisfaction in his smile, Tommy felt the bottom drop away from his certainty. The file trembled in his hands. "Tuppence," he whispered, "is any of this true?" "No." She grabbed the papers and flung them to the floor. "Everything in that file is forged. I pretended to cooperate as part of my cover. That was all. I was never loyal to him. Never." The Dove clasped his hands behind his back. "You see, even now she lies beautifully." Tommy felt a stab of something sharp. Fear? Confusion? Betrayal? For one awful heartbeat, he wondered. Tuppence saw it, and the heartbreak on her face was deeper than any threat the Dove could wield. "Tommy," she whispered, "please, you know me." He did, and yet the shadows of the past loomed so close, so vividly, that for a fraction of a moment doubt flickered. The Dove's smile widened. "You don't know her at all." "Stop it," Tommy snapped. "Stop trying to wedge yourself between us." "Am I?" The Dove stepped nearer. "Or am I simply revealing what she worked so hard to bury?" Tommy forced himself to see Tuppence, not through fear, not through the Dove's poison, but through years of partnership, loyalty, and courage. "She has never betrayed anyone," he said firmly. "Certainly not you, and certainly not me." Tuppence exhaled a sob of relief. The Dove's expression chilled. "So be it." Without warning, he lunged at Tommy. Tommy staggered back but managed to block the first strike. The gallery erupted into a violent scramble. Furniture knocked aside, portraits rattling on their hooks. Tuppence darted away, searching for something, anything, she could use as leverage. The Dove struck with surprising force. Tommy absorbed the blow with his forearm and countered, grappling for control. The man was older but trained, every movement efficient, economical. "You should have stayed ignorant," the Dove hissed. "And you," Tommy grunted, "should have retired." A door flew open at the far end of the gallery. Henri Valois burst in. "Beresford, hold him!" The Dove jerked toward the exit. Valois sprinted, blocking his escape. The Dove pivoted, reaching inside his coat for something glinting. "Don't!" Valois barked. Tuppence grabbed a heavy bronze candlestick from a display table. "Tommy, down!" He ducked. Tuppence hurled the candlestick, striking the Dove's wrist. The object clattered to the floor, a small knife, vicious and slim. The Dove cried out, clutching his hand. Valois seized him, forcing his arms behind his back. Tommy rushed to assist, and together they wrestled the man against the wall. "You won't hold him long," the Dove spat. "You have no idea who I am." Tuppence stepped closer, eyes gleaming with fierce clarity. "I know exactly who you are. You told one story too many." The Dove sneered. "Ridiculous." "No," she said evenly. "You mentioned that Colette died near the river after the meeting, but you shouldn't know that." The Dove faltered. "Only her killer knew her final location," Tuppence continued. "Everyone else believed she was found near the station. The papers said so. The network repeated it. But you corrected me years ago, just as you did tonight." Valois' eyes widened. "Is this true?" The Dove's composure cracked, barely, but enough. Tommy tightened his grip. "You murdered her!" The Dove hissed like a cornered cat. "She was going to expose me." "And tonight?" Tommy said. "You tried again." Valois snapped cuffs around the man's wrists. "Jean-Pierre the Dove Delacroix, you are under arrest." The Dove stopped struggling, his eyes fixed on Tuppence, not with hatred, but with a chilling, triumphant calm. "You think he trusts you again," he whispered. "He hesitated. I saw it." Tommy's jaw tensed. Tuppence flinched. Valois dragged the Dove toward the door, summoning 2 waiting agents. Their footsteps echoed down the corridor. Silence returned. Tommy turned to Tuppence. She looked at him, not with anger, not even with accusation, but with sorrow deep enough to hollow a heart. "For a moment," she said softly, "you wondered." The words cut him more cleanly than the dove's knife ever could have. "Yes," Tommy said, "for a moment, and I'm ashamed of it." Tuppence turned away, folding her arms tightly. Her shoulders trembled. Tommy stepped behind her and placed his hands gently on her arms. "But only for a moment, Tuppence. Only long enough for me to see how easily he manipulates shadows." "You are not a shadow. You never were." She stayed still, breathing unevenly. "I know you," he whispered. "Better than anyone. Better than he ever could. And nothing he says, nothing he forges could change that." Slowly, Tuppence relaxed in his arms. "Tommy," she murmured, voice breaking. "I thought I lost you." "Never," he said, tightening his embrace. "Not in France, not here, not ever." They stood together in the dim gallery hall, surrounded by history and ghosts, some defeated, some lingering, but united again, no longer divided by doubts cunningly sown. Finally, Tuppence turned and rested her forehead against his. "He tried to turn us against each other," she whispered. Tommy kissed her brow. "And he failed." But even as he said it, both knew the truth beneath the triumph. For one brief, terrible heartbeat, Tommy had suspected her, and that wound, though healing, would leave its mark. London felt gentler the morning after the dove's capture, as if the entire city had exhaled. A pale, clean light stretched across the pavements, brushing the rooftops and windows with a softness entirely at odds with the tension that had gripped Tommy and Tuppence through the night. They walked side by side along the quiet street leading home, neither speaking at first. Their steps fell in unison, but their thoughts moved separately, tender, bruised, searching. Tuppence held her coat close around her, though the morning was mild. Tommy glanced at her every few steps, as though reassuring himself she was truly beside him. It was she who finally broke the silence. "Tommy," she said softly, "I should have told you long ago." He stopped walking. She stopped too, turning to face him. "I kept that part of my life locked away because I thought it didn't belong to us," she continued, "because I feared you'd look at me differently if you knew what I'd done, or what I nearly became." Tommy touched her arm gently. "Tuppence, you were barely more than a girl, and you were trying to do something good, even if you stumbled into a world far darker than you expected." Her gaze lowered. "But I hid it from you." He swallowed. "Yes. And for a moment, just a moment, I doubted. That doubt," he shook his head, "it frightened me, not because of what the dove implied, but because I saw how easy it would be for an enemy to twist shadows into something solid." Tuppence stepped closer. "I never wanted to bring shadows into our marriage." "You didn't," Tommy said. "He did, and now he's gone." She let out a shaky breath, and he slipped his arm around her. Together they resumed walking, their steps easing into comfort again. When they reached the gate of their home, the sound of banging greeted them. Albert stood triumphantly on a ladder, hammer in hand, his expression one of exaggerated determination. He had boarded up the broken window with enormous, uneven planks that looked more suited to a pirate ship than a suburban house. "Morning," Albert announced grandly. "Or should I say, security morning. Your residence has now been fortified by Albert the Impenetrable." Tommy bit back a laugh. Tuppence failed entirely. "It looks formidable," she said kindly. "Exactly what I was going for," Albert said, puffing out his chest. "No villains getting through here, not unless they fancy a splinter or two." Inside, the sitting room bore remnants of last night's chaos, but the familiar scent of tea and books steadied the air. Tommy gathered scattered papers while Tuppence knelt to retrieve the small box where she kept mementos from her childhood. She opened it, gazed at the contents, then added the broken pieces of her porcelain teacup, the one that had shattered so inexplicably days ago. Tommy watched her. "Keeping it?" "Yes," she said quietly. "Not to mourn it, to acknowledge it." She closed the lid gently. "The past is the past. It shouldn't be erased, only understood." He sat beside her. "You're very wise, Mrs. Beresford." "That's only because I married brilliantly," she replied with a faint smile. They spent the next hour setting things right, straightening cushions, sweeping the last of the glass, wiping away the residue of danger as one might clean a sooty fireplace. The more they restored their home, the more their hearts seemed to settle. A knock sounded once on the door. Tommy opened it to find Henri Valois still in his worn coat, holding a slim envelope. His face was composed, but there was warmth in his eyes, a kind rarely seen from those long embedded in intelligence work. "I came to thank you both," he said. "You saved us," Tommy replied. "No," Valois said. "You saved yourselves, and you helped us capture a man who has evaded justice for too long." Tuppence stepped forward. "Henri, is it truly over?" "As over as such things ever are," Valois said with a faint, rueful smile. "There will be reports, debriefings, files that may or may not exist, but the Dove's influence ends here. His operatives will scatter, and those we can track will be managed." "And Mrs. Merriweather?" Tuppence asked. Valois nodded. "An alias. She worked for him for years. We intercepted her last night trying to leave by the servants' exit. She will answer questions, many questions." Tommy exchanged a glance with Tuppence. One more shadow resolved. Valois handed Tommy the envelope. "A small token of gratitude. Do not expect clarity, only closure." Then he tipped his hat. "Goodbye, Finch." Tuppence stiffened, but Valois' voice was gentle, not teasing. "You chose the right life," he added quietly. "Be proud of that." With that, he departed down the street. Tommy closed the door. "What's in the envelope?" Tuppence asked. Tommy opened it and found a single folded page. No names, no dates, only one sentence. "Colette Moreau, loyal to the last. Her killer is gone." Tuppence touched the page with trembling fingers. She deserved justice. "And she has it," Tommy said. They sat together for a while, absorbing the stillness. The house felt lighter now, unburdened. Finally, Tommy leaned back. "Now, what shall we do with the rest of our morning?" Tuppence tilted her head thoughtfully. "We could make tea." "Tea," Tommy repeated, adopting a grave tone. "A bold plan. Very daring." She swatted his arm. "Don't mock me. I've survived an arch-villain. I'm entitled to gentleness." Tommy grinned. "Consider yourself shielded from all mockery for at least, 5 minutes." She laughed, a bright, unguarded laugh that filled the whole room with something like sunlight. Then she rose and moved toward the kitchen. Tommy followed, watching her with affection sharpened by fear and relief. "Tuppence," she paused. He reached out and gently tucked a stray curl behind her ear. "I never want you to feel you must hide anything from me again." Her eyes softened. "And I never want to give you a reason to doubt me again." He touched her cheek. "Even when I did, only for a second, it felt like losing a part of myself." Tuppence stepped into his arms, resting her head against his chest. "We've faced danger before, but this was different." "Yes," Tommy agreed, "because it wasn't just a threat to our lives, it was a threat to our trust." "And trust," she whispered, "is harder to rebuild." "But rebuild it we shall," Tommy said, tilting her chin up gently. "We always do." She smiled, the old, mischievous, beloved smile. "You're terribly sentimental, Tommy." He kissed her forehead. "And you're terribly brave." "Brave?" she scoffed. "I hid in a broom cupboard once to avoid a tax collector." "Yes," Tommy said, "and bravely at that." She laughed again and tugged him toward the kettle. As the familiar ritual began, the clink of cups, the soft hiss of boiling water, the comforting scent of tea leaves unfurling, life resumed its rightful shape, not untouched, not unchanged, but intact. While the tea steeped, Tuppence opened the small box again and looked at the broken porcelain pieces nestled inside. Tommy watched her. "Putting the past to rest?" he asked gently. "No," she replied. "Just giving it a place." He nodded. "A good place?" "A safe one," she said. They settled into their chairs, cups in hand. The window, temporarily boarded but glowing with filtered morning light, let in a soft, reassuring warmth. Tommy gazed at Tuppence, studying the curve of her smile, the intelligence in her eyes, the resilience woven through her entire being. Whatever her past had held, whatever shadows she had outrun, she was here now, with him. And that was enough. He reached across the table and took her hand. "Tuppence," he murmured, "whatever you were, whatever you did, you're mine, and that's the whole story." Her fingers closed around his. "The only story that matters," she said. And in the quiet that followed, deep, peaceful, and entirely their own, the lavender finch finally came to rest.